Okay, sounds good.
All right, all right, all right. We're recording. Good evening. Of course, this is good evening, everyone. Thank you and welcome to Pep Talks. Thank you for joining us in the living room. Where this Pep Talks are frank conversations about the state of education today. Um, Thank you for joining us. This is our last show in the series, and I'm joined by a magnificent brother today. So what I'm going to do is do this intro, and then I'll introduce my guest today. Welcome to Pep Talk, the frank conversation about the state of education, the disparities in our school discipline system, both nationally and here in Dallas, call attention to the need for change in our school culture, the use of zero tolerance practices and the over disciplining of youth of color, specifically Black youth, have continued the flow of Black boys and girls into the school to prison pipeline. Our educational system spends vast amounts of money for security services and minuscule amounts comparatively on the mental and emotional well-being of our youth. Systemic racism, racist practices and policies have impacted communities of color, but specifically Black communities, creating wealth and achievement gaps that spill into our school system. Implicit bias, a lack of cultural awareness consistently criminalize Black student behavior, while dismissing and minimizing the same behavior in other students. Zero tolerance practices and policies are proven not to change student behavior, but increase aggression and disengage youth from the learning process. Learning is not one size fits all. Moving our educational culture from deficit thinking toward a whole child approach is the goal of PEP. And this week, our topic is the future of student wellness in education, a doctoral candidate's point of view. And I'm joined today by my brother, Trevor McCray. And Trevor, would you please do the introduction because I can't do it justice.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you for having me on the Pep Talk, I would say. But to introduce myself, hello and welcome everyone. My name is Trevor McCray, and I currently serve as a doctoral student. I can't wait to be a candidate, but I currently serve as a doctoral student at the University of Texas at Arlington in their K through 16 Educational Leadership and Policy Studies doctoral program. I'm originally from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I currently reside in Dallas, Texas, where I'm currently working in higher education as a career consultant at Texas Women's University. I know it sounds like a lot. You know, probably asking like why I'm doing work in, I mean, in the the public school system versus in higher ed. We're kind of getting the inner weeds of that. But you know, really and truly, my passion is really to be an advocate for our Black and Brown communities. I come from an inner city within Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and again, from one of the biggest things that wakes me up and motivates me is that I remember where I came from. And I remember that the work that I have to remind myself that the work that I'm doing is not going to impact, you know, hierarchies or elitism. It's going to impact those individuals who don't have a voice. Those who, you know, they're always kind of told, oh, this is what's going to be best for the Black and Brown student. This is what's going to be the best for the Black and Brown community. And so, again, I want to take the resources that I have and that I'm learning and that I'm equipped in myself with and pour back into my community. When we talk about the talented tent by W.E.B. Du Bois, you know, that's what he meant, you know, gaining that experience and uplifting your community, not going off and, you know, doing the inner weeds of everything else and forgetting where you come from. You have to still pour back into your communities. And again, my community made me who I am. And that's why I'm here to show it molded me of who I am today. And this is who I am here to present. So at the end of the day, I don't hide who I am. And at the end of the day, you get what you get. Sometimes I'm gonna speak with Ebonics. Sometimes I may speak with a little bit more intellect. But at the end of the day, I'm gonna give it to you the way that I feel as though it needs to be given. So yes, that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And you guys see why I have my brother on here today because this is the future of our education. This is the future. This is what's going to change the future. This is what is going to make a difference, change the culture. And I'm going to start there. So our culture, like I said in the intro, is deficit thinking, right? So I'm going to ask you two things. The first, and if you could answer this, you can probably answer both of these in one answer. The first is, how do you feel about deficit thinking, and how did it affect your education?
Mm,
And do you think it's creating the discipline issues and population that we have today?
Okay. I mean, answer the first part, and I'll probably ask you to restate the second one. Um, my thoughts on deficit thinking or deficit approach. I think when you examine or you look through a lens of deficit, you look through or you examine that particular population or identity from a negative lens. So they're already starting 10 feet or 10, like they're already starting 10 steps backwards. And so unfortunately, it's one of those things where for me is that I'm never able to see the good in someone if I continuously look through a deficit lens. Because I'm going to think about all of the barriers, all of the constructs that are associated with, the things that the ramifications of why they can't do something. And I'm never going to provide a space for them to actually be able to say they can do something. And so for me, the deficit thinking is obsolete in my opinion, because at the end of the day, we've always been told what we couldn't do as Black people. And so I have to change that narrative on my end to say, no, I want to be able to showcase and shed light on the things that we can do and that we are telling ourselves that we can't do. So again, the deficit model is a negative approach. You're always going to look at it through the lens of the negative things that are affecting that particular population or identity, or those things within your life. You're going to always look at it through that lens, and for me, it's surrounded or it's suffocated by negativity.
Okay. And so the second question was, do you think that it's creating or bolstering the disciplined population that we have today? Because schools they definitely run on deficit thinking, but we don't think that we do.
So it does. And I think that when you think about historical concepts, or you think about just, let's say, Black boys, if let's get into the nitty gritty. When you think about Black boys, what is the negative stereotypes that that they see of Black boys? I was actually just doing some research, and this super predator word comes up, and this kind of came up around the administrative area of, let's say, Bill Clinton, and you think about his administration when it came to the federal crime bill. But let's say we want to take it back a little bit further, Ronald Reagan, and the concept of what a Black male means to America is already a deficit. And so when you have that infiltrated within the school system, you have these teachers that are looking at Black boys as problematic, troublemakers, criminals, predators. And so and if we really want to, I really would say a learning disability, and I'll throw that in too, because if you look at the data, you see that a large population of Black boys are they're influxed within special ed because of um, because they don't fit the mold of what white education looks like. And so they cause any disturbance, well, they're class disruption. Or it may be something that's going on with that particular student that they may need to seek counseling, or they may need some forms of rehabilitation in the sense of, being able to be acclimated within a classroom where it's different people and different types of cultures that they're surrounded by. But at the end of the day, they're not given the opportunity because the lens that's being looked at through the administrators and the teacher is from a deficit point of view. They're looking at these individuals from the stereotypical lens of what they've been taught about black students or Black boys specifically. And so, again, I do think that is infiltrated within the school system when it comes to disciplinary actions, because, again, they're looking at it from this deficit standpoint.
Okay. So you and I worked on a little project, a event together, and you did something wonderful that I loved, and it was playing devil's advocate. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to do that here in this conversation while we're having this. So you're talking about you said administrative, but here in Dallas, a lot of the administration is African American. Mm-hmm. In Dallas, lots of in where we have the most issues with discipline, there are a lot of Black teachers, mm-hmm. right? This happens in Black neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. So can I get your explanation on that, sir?
So I will first say every kinfolk is not just kinfolk. So I would definitely just start off with it. And I think that one of the things that I particularly found within my research that I did this semester in a pilot study is that although individuals who may look like you think they're going to have your best interest, one of my particular participants spoke about how when he went to a predominantly Black school, the expectation for him was low. So when we think about that deficit approach, it's the expectation for Black students to thrive and be excellent in these spaces are not there, even if they look like us, because they're already those teachers and administrators are going into these spaces, understanding the student population that they're dealing with, assuming that they understand, because I think that big word is assume, assuming they understand that they have to teach or handle these students the way they feel will be best for them to learn. The best way for someone that's Black to learn is through some form of disciplinary actions. And so the expectation on the learning side is going to be far less than the expectation on the disciplinary side, because what they're going in, these kids are already disruptive. So I know the disciplinary expectation needs to be there in order to combat anything else. But again, at the end of the day, I think it just, we can't assume, going into these spaces that every person that because they look like us, they're going to provide an opportunity for us to succeed. They assume that they understand the populations that they are serving. And that's the approach that they go into that's the vision and the approach that they take whenever they are conducting themselves within these classrooms or within these administrative buildings. Because I think at the end of the day that they either they understand their population, they understand how to work with those students, or it's just been a culture of understanding how to work with those students, or this is how they feel that they have to demand respect when they're coming into these spaces. I don't think it's right, but I do think that at the end of the day, we have to stop um, getting to a point where is that we fall on this notion that every person that looks like us is going to provide a space for us to feel a welcome, but also provide a safe space for us to learn and not be disciplined the way white people would discipline us. But it's a perpetuation of the same system that has always been against us and pushing us to, I would say, against the wall and making us feel as though we're not welcome. We've never been welcome ever since the Brown versus the Board of Education. If we really want to be honest, once we started to integrate schools, the notion of what we knew was, like, let's say, Black schools versus white schools, that dissipated. Black teachers and Black administrators had to conform to the whiteness of the education system. And so, they're thinking more so on that, on the academic level, at the administrative level, I would say, they're thinking more so, what does TEA require out of us? What is our grade for the school? They're having to report all of these things. And so because they're having to report all of these things, again, they're abiding by the confines of the structure of education, which is built upon whiteness. And so trying to go into an all Black school doesn't mean that, oh, because I have, all Black teachers or all Black administrators, that they're going to do anything different from, let's say, an all white administrator or all white teachers. Now, you may have teachers that are in the system at these particular schools that do care, but the expectation levels, especially within all Black schools, I'm gonna say inner city schools, the expectation is never there. Because they assume that the students are just coming to school just to come to school.
That's some bold words right there, brother. Y'all, you getting ready to get out here in this world. So.
Well, and I can't speak. I would say this: I can't speak on. I definitely they have some amazing Dallas ISD administrators and teachers, and so I never want to speak any ill will. But if we want to be honest, the confines of the education system around the world is built upon whiteness, and you have to conform to that whiteness if you want to make it within this particular public school education. And it's not often that things will change, because when you think about the policymakers, do policymakers look like us? Who serves on the who serves on the public education committee that understands let's use Dallas ISD for example. Who serves on that public education committee within the Senate that understands the ins and outs of what's going on within our Dallas Independent School District schools? Who understands the Hispanic population or Latinx population? Who understands the Black population of the students that are in these areas? If your politicians are not on the ground actually learning and understanding, how can they vouch for anything that you need in order to accommodate the student's ability to learn?
So, audience, I don't have to say it this week. I'm grateful that I don't have to say this week. You're hearing it from someone else. So, you know, that's what we're talking about. You know, and that was my next question to you about advocacy. What, you know, because we're talking about the problem, right? And then what I always want to do on the show is move towards solutions. What do you think? That kind of thing. But, you know, what we're here doing right now is, okay, we're dispelling. I brought that up because I don't want to say, oh, it's all white people. You know what I'm saying? Because then if you can look at the schools in Dallas and say, no, that's not how it is, right? So then we get this response, and then it's so you brought to a point that there's a disconnect between the state, the district, and the community,
Mhm.
right? So I was on a call. And working with some people this week, and we started talking about South Oak Cliff.
Mhm.
And I was praising South Oak Cliff for how they connect their community within the school, right? And show the value of the community. And you can see monies being poured into South, you know what I'm saying, into South Oak Cliff. Um, what? Why is that? Why do you think that is?
So I think one thing that especially within Southfield Cliff, you may have individuals who not only do they understand their community, understand the schools, but they also may understand the political ranks as well. And so they're able to advocate for themselves because they wholeheartedly understand all of the components that are associated with South Oak Cliff. When you don't have that in other areas, then that political gain you don't get. And so then you also have to understand who are the politicians and what are their backgrounds. Because, obviously, when you think about their backgrounds, and if you have someone that's, let's say, originally from Oak Cliff, South Oak Cliff to be exact, and they have political, gains within their community, then it's a little bit more accessible. So you talk about that social capital. And so again, it becomes a little bit more easy because now you have a little bit more direct access to where their funding comes from. But when you don't have that in other areas, and you don't actually have the politicians going into these areas that they represent, then that's where you see the disconnect. But I definitely would say when it comes to South Oak Cliff, obviously they've had some prominent people come out of the area. And so they're well connected. They understand the task and they do it. And that's why they've been able to be successful and have lucrative funding coming in to support. And then also too, it's just the community that they serve. If it's not a huge influx of other communities that may be going through the same thing that individuals in South Oak Cliff are going through, then at the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, I mean, this particular populous community may meet let's say the confines, or may meet the things that they feel on a political level. It's like, okay, well, I definitely think that they deserve it. They've been doing some amazing things, meeting a quota in a sense. But you may not have those individuals in those other areas, in those other parts of Dallas that have the same capital that South Oak Cliff has.
Okay. Okay. Um, we do some things together, and like in this advocacy part, and got an opportunity to just sit with some people this week, and we were talking about like changing the culture. How can we alter the culture of, getting rid of disciplinary actions, exclusionary disciplinary actions? What would be the solutions? How will we implement that? What's that going to look like? Not just from a community aspect, but from a district. You know what I'm saying? From a site and district aspect. And the district has its things, and people are deciding what they're doing. Um, I'd like to hear what you think some of the solutions would be to getting rid of, instead of using exclusionary practices. Well, wait, before I go that far, do you believe that exclusionary practices are necessary?
I think they're only necessary if they cause a harm or disturbance to the school and the safety of the school. Um, that is the only thing I feel exclusionary practices should be in place for. Um, so,
So I'm going to have you, because, if we haven't seen anything in this world and in this nation, the use of defining what harm is, I felt like I felt like he was a threat, and we've got 8 bullets in the back, or I felt like he was a threat because you asked him to reach for the identification and you shot him then. So
right.
I think we need to go a little deeper with that.
So let's unpack that harm thing, and I'm glad you called me out on it because I think that harm is I would definitely say is very much of a Passover word in a sense, but harm in the sense of maybe possessing marijuana or some form of drugs on campus, some form of a weapon or anything that can cause any bodily harm to anyone. So in that aspect, that's what I mean by harm. And granted, I know any form of drug may not do any damage or harm to anyone. But again, you never know what the distribution of those drugs can do on the campus, how they can affect someone's child's or kids' health. And so again, those are things that I think cause a safety hazard when it comes to harming the environment of the actual school. That I think exclusionary practices do need to be put in place for those detrimental things that can cause harm to someone's child or someone's kids while they're on the grounds of the actual school. Now, when it comes
Okay.
to now, I know you threw in bullying and things of that nature, but even if I go a little step above that, like bullying to me, that's a psychological thing. Students may not be aware that that is a form of bullying or that they are bullying because it may be something that they're experiencing within their own environment when they leave that school. That can be another form of trauma that they inflict onto someone else. And
Okay.
so again, to me, that's not harm. That's something that's psychological that a counselor may need to be in place. But I know I know the next question may be coming with.
Wait, no.
But
So
yeah,
let me ask
so I think at the end of the day, just to wrap that piece up, harm to me is anything in regards to a physical weapon, some forms of drugs, anything of that nature. Fighting, to be honest, I think that again, because you are causing harm either to yourself or to someone else's child, that can be also to another form of harming or causing a disturbance within the environment of school that obviously cause disruption. So to me, those are forms that I feel as though like that are harm. It's not profiling or anything, just things that can be again inflicting harm onto someone's child while they're in the confines of their school.
I'm glad you brought this up because this is where we need the discussion to be, right?
Mhm.
So if a child brings drugs to school, right? Do you think it's just get rid of them, or should there be practices and policies in place, solutions in place that why did the child bring the drugs? I was speaking with someone, and the child brought a knife to school because they were being bullied outside.
Mhm.
They've been getting beat up and all of that, so they had that. Without understanding the why, if we have just a zero tolerance policy, then you're kicking someone out because without understanding the why. So do you think there should be built-in fail safe?
I definitely think that they should have like even with the exclusionary practices, I think they should have tiers. So it shouldn't
Which
just
is
be.
what we have now. Which is what we have now.
Well, I think that also too, like with those tiers, obviously the first two of those tiers, obviously interventions or some form of counseling should occur. Like the last resort to me should be that this individual is either expelled or suspended from obviously the school and losing out on that curriculum time. So to me, I do think that it needs to be like infractions that are put into place, but the last resort will be obviously them being suspended from obviously school. So I think that at the end of the day is one of those things where preventative measures should be in place and they should have, obviously, the first two will be very proactive, which the last one will be, obviously reactive based on obviously the situation. But I do think that in your case, obviously, if a student was to bring a knife based on obviously being bullied and wanting to defend themselves, the conversation of questions should be, what was the purpose of you bringing it? Or what was your why of bringing it? To really understand the culture and what's going on. Because again, administrators and teachers are not able to have all hands on deck or all eyes on deck when things are actually occurring. So a lot of things that they are going to miss. And you very well are right that that particular student, may not have meant to come to school with this particular, I mean, the goal or the idea was, to defend themselves, but it wasn't that they just brought it just to just say show and tell just to have.
I
So
get you.
and questioning do like that does need to transpire, but I do think that in regards to transpiring, it doesn't just need to be with, let's say, the principal or the assistant principal. Like you need to have some form of an individual who is that is trained psychologically to help to help understand the situation, but also to help understand that particular student as well. And I think oftentimes, especially with Black and Brown students, they don't get that opportunity.
Okay.
And so interventions, I think far as proactive, understanding that why, and it needs to be someone in there that's not, let's say, principal, admin, it needs to be someone that can actually understand and break down to get to know that student to where that student feels safe and comfortable enough to share maybe why this particular situation happened. And I just going from my own experience of what I've experienced, administrators, I went to all Black, I mean, I went to literally inner city, all Black high school. They already knew whether you had a fight or you did anything that could cause any bodily harm to any student or any person on that campus, they were sending you home, call your parents. It wasn't no conversation, it wasn't any of that. It was call your parents and you were leaving for the day or you were leaving for a couple of days. So, at the end of the day, it was never a moment that I felt as though you were seen as a student because you could have had a valid reason. You could have had a reason why you had to do what you had to do, but you're not given that space and opportunity. So I think being able to create infractions or being able to create these tiers, although they may have them, let's be honest, like they have tiers now, but they're not perfect. They're not inclusive. And sometimes when you have these policies that are in place or these infractions or tiers in place, they inadvertently do the opposite. And so again, even though you have these, and then when we talk about those policies, that's a whole nother tangent. But we talk about these policies and we think that you know they're going to be the end all be all. But we also have to push back on policies as well because policies can be created to help one thing, but it inadvertently affects another thing.
So I personally don't think that we need, if you are bringing a gun to school,
Mm-hmm.
I understand that. If you're bringing, it still needs to be some inclusion of counseling. It needs to be, once a threat is, if there's a threat, then the threat is nullified. It still needs to be some counseling. It needs to be we need to find out why. We need to put things, fail safes in place that are working with the kid, what's actually going on. Yes, I understand that. But when we're talking and that, if you're saying that for tiers, I can understand that, right? And then they're being fail safe. But when we're talking classroom disruption is leading to referrals and juvenile justice referrals,
That's
hugging
not.
someone too tight and things like that, right? So
I think
that's not
that
what you're speaking of, correct?
no, not what I'm speaking of, and I think
Okay.
that those actions, we want to be honest, I think those actions stem from a historical standpoint. When after the
Okay.
Brown versus the Board of Education decision, a great deal of policing started to occur when it came because obviously they didn't want us in their schools. And so it became salient. It wasn't until Ronald Reagan came in and it was the war on drugs where this zero tolerance policy terminology started to come into play. Actually, the education system actually inherited that terminology of the zero tolerance policy. And it was centered around creating safe environments for students to
Mm-hmm.
come to. And so I think, when you think about the policing of, the class disturbance or someone's pants is too tight, all of these different, I would say petty nuances. I'm gonna speak very honest here. Petty nuances that is just like, that's not a disturbance. That's not an issue. I think that it becomes very nitpick, as a black man driving every day, I could be driving and just turning the corner and a police wants to stop me. Again, it's just nitpicking. And so again, a lot of things have been infiltrated into the education system that has been deemed as disciplinary action. I mean, that's been deemed that it should seek disciplinary actions. But in all honesty, the things that I broke down for as harm are the things that's the only thing I feel should include as exclusionary practices. And I do think that they are working on the terminology when it comes to policies. I'm not sure if you are aware of the House Bill 674 that they passed in 2017 that went into effect immediately that banned K through second grade students from being suspended. In the wording of the actual bill, they actually specify, the harm piece in regards to breaking it down in regards to what it includes. And so you don't really kind of see those extra nuances that are associated with students just being suspended or written up. But it actually kind of confines to, the possession of drugs or the possession of a weapon, so those are the things that it specifies within the particular bill. So again, they are trying in a sense within the wording of policy. But again, that particular policy had some discrepancies because you look at it from that policy only focused on out of school suspension and never focused on in-school suspension, which the policy inadvertently affected in-school suspension. So I know that can get into the weeds, but just to answer
There we go. No, but that's so, none of this is none of this is for you to have the same viewpoint as myself, right? This is a conversation.
right,
And in a conversation, people have to be willing to have it and then discuss, give meaning to what they're expressing, right? So because then, so I brought up the tiers because we have those already. And, people are going to be, because we're actually now talking, the district is talking about, banning exclusionary practices. And again, policy is going to be written overarching, and then how that's carried out is something totally different. And if you leave out anything, if you leave out sections or leave things to assumption, right, without clarifying, defining, then we run into we're going to repeat history, right?
right,
So what I'm doing right now is just having the same conversation that I'm going to have later on with, policymakers, community, administrators, that kind of thing that people are going to have, because we're talking about, okay, you're saying I can't kick the kid out, the kid's disrupting the class. Well, what do I do? Right? Well, so what are the solutions? And I took us on a tangent, but that's where I want to get back to. What do you think is a viable, or are some viable solutions to exclusionary practices? I'll leave it there. What do you think are some viable solutions to exclusionary?
so
Don't accept restorative justice in just a blanket statement, because that's deep right there.
right. So just to kind of answer that question, I'm focused on two areas. So obviously the first one will be the area that I think is, the most lucrative and the most involved in far as conversation is hiring more counselors. I think that's one of the biggest pieces there because, oftentimes these students are typically going through a great deal of things. And we're obviously in the midst of a pandemic and probably will continue to be in the midst of a pandemic until the world decides to grab the virus by its horns and get rid of it. But, really being able to psychologically understand our students holistically. They're more than just testing props. They're more than just learners. They are individuals. And so these individuals have to feel as though they are individuals. And whenever space that they're in, they have to feel as though they're seen. And I'm not saying feel as though they're seen. You have to make them feel seen. And so that's one of the biggest things is, we really have to invest in counselors and be intentional about what the particular roles are for these particular counselors. Obviously the nuances of school counselors and I don't really even know what school counselors even they were guidance counselors and, all of those things. And so really being able to understand and have intentionality about what are these counselors actually coming into their role doing, and what are they intended to do with our particular students on a day-to-day in and out and through the ins and outs. I think also too, allowing schools to develop what their positive behavior initiatives are, because I think that they understand their students more than anyone. Obviously, districts have this PBIS, obviously this positive behavior intervention, program, incentives program, I would say, that allows these students to, be rewarded for their positive behavior. But I think if we embed that just not only for rewarding positive behavior, but just awarding students in general for just being positive, whether it's on a regular day, is on a special day, or, whatever it is, creating that space where it's a positive environment. I think when you create that space and you allow the schools to create that space and what that looks like for their students, and they tailor it to fit their students, that will allow for behavior change to occur. That will allow for teachers to feel more supported. I think that's one of the biggest things too, is that teachers don't feel supported when it comes to classroom management. And so oftentimes they're not really, they're taught classroom management, but that's from a theoretical perspective. But when you're practically in those classrooms, that's a whole different ballgame. And so when you don't feel supported by your administrators, then that's also too hard. And so you rely heavily on those disciplinary practices, because that's pretty much all you know in regards to how do you feel as though you can control your class, is to make sure that you can remove those students out of your class. But if you create a welcoming environment, a positive behavior environment, how do you think that's going to influence and impact your day-to-day operation, not only from an administrative standpoint, but from a teacher standpoint as well? And so again, I think that when you have both of those ideas and you have individuals that's being intentional, we can throw money at any problem every day, but that don't mean it's going to fix anything. Remember, I told you last time, systems throw money at everything. It's only a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
The Band-Aid is, the Band-Aid can peel off. You're only Band-Aiding a problem that the wound is still not healing. And so when you talk about those restorative justice tactics, restorative justice to me is that you have to understand your students. You have to understand your community that you're serving. You have to understand, how can I develop practices that are going to be teachable moments for our students, and not moments where I feel as though like I'm talking down to someone. Because when you don't develop that student psychologically, they're going to be a rebel. It's going to continuously be a repetitive cycle of disciplinary actions, because you're perpetuating the system with the same thing that they're already experiencing probably within their life. But when you actually take the time to get to know a student holistically, and you're intentional and they understand your intentionality and your realness, they're gonna give you them authentic selves. They're probably gonna give you more than they even give their parents or their parent at home or guardian. But you have to see the student. If you don't see the student and it's very performative, then you get the performative disruptions and disciplinary problems.
I'm glad you went there. So you just helping me out so much. You just don't know how much help you helping me out. So because we were, the buzzword nowadays is restorative practices. That's what we need, restorative practices. But until
I would say, what are we restoring, in a sense? That's almost like, and kind of to me that aligns, and that's what we have to start questioning things too, because it sounds good in theory, but to me that whole rhetoric, restorative justice, what are we restoring? It's almost saying like, make America great again.
I'm gonna leave that one. I'm not gonna even touch that one. Restorative justice, we're talking. So I think a lot of people think of, healing circles. All of the actual practices are wonderful. They work. They're proven to work. There's data on that and all that. But a framework of restorative justice is changing the culture, right? So you're getting, like you said, and you said that you're talking about building relationships. You're talking about support for teachers. You're talking about teachers being able to talk to administrators, and they have that input and that relationship. It's teachers are involved in the PBIS, right? They're involved in creating the discipline and who gets to come in and all of that whole framework.
Mhm.
Because again, if I implement healing circles, that's great. But if, I still see is that's just like, again, a Band-Aid to me,
Right.
right? Because I don't, it's, and I've said this plenty of times before, if you tell a drunk not to drink and you just take the drink away, but they still got the same drunk mind, they're going to figure out a way to drink, right? Because
Mhm.
they still think like that.
Right.
So that's what we're talking about. And I like your answers. Your answers were, to me, beautiful, because you're talking about communication. You're talking about relationship. You're talking about changing the culture. You're
Mhm.
talking about no longer seeing the students as a problem, no longer seeing the teachers as lacking something. You're talking about empowering teachers. You're
Mhm.
talking about creating positive relationships, and positive relationships in and of themselves, they build a peaceful mind, a peaceful culture, right? Because you do get mad with your family, and you do but you can always look past
Right.
things because you have a relationship and you know them. Now, that doesn't mean that, Uncle Ray don't need to get knocked, but you know what I mean?
Right.
You
Yep.
you get it, right? But it's that kind of thing. And I think um, what we're talking about is not just, we're not talking about implementing, uh, putting band-aids on things. We're
Mhm.
talking about actually empowering the whole system,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
And changing how we do education.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, you have to change the system. And, obviously the topic of the conversation is student wellness. Well, you can't really just impact student wellness by putting a Band-Aid on it. It's going to take more than just, just the student. It's going to take more than just providing spaces just for the students. I look at it as a domino effect. When you change policy and it's in congruence with what the district and those actual schools within that district needs, then the administrators feel supported. They feel supported by TEA. They feel supported by the state. Then they're going to support their teachers. They're going to support their staff. The teachers are going to then support their students. Then their students' wellness will then be impacted. I think that when you focus, I mean, not even focus just on students, but I think that if teachers are not well, their students' wellness won't be well.
You
Yes, you can.
can't. I mean, I
But
can't. That's like saying, don't do it. You drinking, but don't do what I say. Do what I
right,
say, but don't do what I do.
hmm
Right? But I can't do that.
right.
I can't do that. Right? So yes.
I
So
think
I'm going
as
to take these last few minutes to tell you. I want to hear your utopia. What is utopia for you? What is a perfect school system, educational system, school, however, for you? What would this look like?
I think a perfect school for me would be a school that allows freedom to teach, freedom to be yourself, freedom to allow every individual that comes through those doors to express their learning language in a sense, I would say, in a way that they know how. It would definitely be a school that allows each individual, again, each component of the school to remove the confines of what modern education or education has been as a whole and allow students and people to learn, whether that's inside the classroom or outside of the classroom, and really engage these students externally and internally. For me, I want students to be able to not only learn from a standpoint of, being in school from a textbook, but how can you apply that in the real world? How can we have curriculum that, if I'm teaching ELA, let's say poetry. I'm teaching from a standpoint where I can introduce Tupac's songs or Tupac's poetry and have them break down what he actually means by that. I want to be able to have that luxury because again, they're not going to have Tupac on a standardized test. So to be in all actuality, I want to do away with standardized tests. Standardized tests cannot tell me how smart a child is or how they're developing or growing as a learner. But I also too, I think that being able to teach them based on their learning ability and being able to grade them off that is important. But I think also too, allowing each person that comes to that school to showcase who their identity is. And I think that to me, if I allowed that space, that creative space for them to be who they are and not put these confines of who I want them to be, then the disciplinary actions wouldn't be a problem because I'm embracing who they are as their full self. If I have a student who's loud and boisterous, I also have to understand, yes, I have to teach them that, okay, you have to make sure you have an inside voice and an outside voice, but I also have to understand that they may come from a background that's their culture.
Or that might just be who they are, because
It
I'm
could
that
be
loud and
very,
boisterous kid, right?
it could be very well who you are, but also too, you learned that from somewhere, and that could be your environment. But I want to be able to embrace that because at the end of the day, when you don't allow students or individuals to feel seen, then that's where you have the problem. That's where people act out. And again, I want people to feel as though, again, that I feel like I want so much in regards to this utopia because I just feel as though education it strips away your creativity when you walk into those confines of those hallways. It strips away who you are as a in a core. And I'm speaking from my minority people because when you walk into these spaces, you have to abide by the confines of whiteness within education. And so your wholeness is not accepted into these spaces. For me, my utopia at the end of the day, I want everyone's wholeness when they walk into those doors of the schoolhouse. Their every being is accepted in every way, from their learning styles to their ability to just be themselves in any space. I don't want to treat education as a jailhouse. I want to treat education as fun, like a space where it's fun and you're also learning at the same time. I want to be able to make sure that those students leave and they don't want to go home. They got to go home, but they don't want to go home. But they also have the opportunities to develop that capital that most Black and Brown students are not privy to until they venture off into college. And it's not necessarily that you're going to develop social capital there or you're going to develop any forms of capital there. But oftentimes, if they're not developing that at the roots, then this educational gap, just salary gap, all of these things are going to continue because we're trying to fix things. We're trying to fix things as they elevate. We're not trying to fix the actual roots, the planet roots that are actually continuously causing the cancer that we see on an everyday basis. So at the end of the day, my utopia is to create a space that allows every individual to come into that learning space to be them authentic selves and to learn the way that they feel as though they can learn and pushing them past those learning boundaries, but also to accepting them for who they are as a learner.
Okay, I can take that. I'll take that. That's this was the last conversation in this series, and we've talked. We've had people that have been out in the work field and education on here. We've had counselors, we've had um, lawyers, we've had a whole range of people, and the overarching theme was that we need to do away with the culture that we have.
Mhm.
We need more communication. We need better relationships between community, teachers. Teachers need more support. Principals need to stand up and change the way culture is done in their school, like you were saying, the PBIS, and all of these things, and that the discipline issues would diminish to the things that, like you said, there are some things that have to be handled, right?
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? We're not talking about when we say discipline, and I'm about to go on Clubhouse with this. So, no, but that's very true. There's some things in the works that are coming, but we're going to start having spaces like this, right? So, because we're talking about discipline, the real word discipline means to model, right? Like when you're discipled, you're taught how to be this thing, right? So if we're teaching kids what we're teaching them in school is, like you said, how to be prisoners, how to be good little boys and girls that mind their manners and do these things and all this, and you better learn what's on this test, and you have to do this so we can get our money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was never built for, it was always built for an upper echelon. It was not built for any lower class in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it was built off of providing for industrial revolutionary uh, time. So it was, we don't even feel things like that anymore. But it's the thing that everybody has said, that if we change the culture, it came down to, if we change the culture, we get rid of our discipline issues,
Mm-hmm.
right? And at the
And
end,
I don't think that, the culture is going to eradicate any disciplinary situation. So obviously I don't want to put that facade out there as though like, it's going to be a golden picture painted or utopia. But I do think that in a way it can help remedy those disciplinary
the
situations.
majority of them,
Yeah.
the
Because
majority of them.
you was not now, and I think that, and one of the things that I've learned this semester, the schoolhouse is really just meant to just teach the content that the state is telling them that they need to teach to pass a test. Nowhere in the confines of that text does it say teach the student holistically. And so when you're basically, you're just seeing them as test takers. You're just seeing them as, I need you to be a sponge. I need you to know this information so you can pass the test. That's where the gray area begins, because it's not a space that actually is.
That's not education.
It's not education. Like, you're not teaching the entire student. And so, it's through those relationships that you develop with your students, that you honestly get to know them outside of just the classroom and the content that you're teaching. That, you can have a teacher, let's say a Black male teacher, who, because they focus heavily on relationship building with their students, they may never have a disciplinary situation within their classrooms. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that they may not have to write someone up, or it's not something that they have to do on a basis, because some kids could just have bad days, but also not penalizing them for having a bad day, but trying to understand why they had a bad day. Because us as adults, we have bad days. And
Yeah, I was getting ready to get on you about that, man.
Well, but look, I mean, we have bad days, but also too, we're not written up. I mean, now we may have a bad day where we get pulled over, or we may have a bad day, we have a flat tire or something like that. But I don't feel as though if I have a bad day, I'm going to be disciplined as an adult. So why make a kid feel that way? Or why make a student feel that way? Because then they grow up and it becomes institutionalized within their mind that they're walking on this fine line between being disciplined and just being a regular citizen. And for black and brown students, that's pretty much walking the school to prison pipeline. So, and I feel as though like they have all of these practices within the school system, and then you graduate from the school system and you go into life, and it's like you go into college and you're not following the line leader. You don't have to wear these uniforms. It's just like simple. It's like, why are we doing this? Like, why not allow freedom in education? Why not, like, that's why I just feel, I wholeheartedly agree with every other panelist that's been on here, because at the end of the day, when you change that culture, you may get better results. We're sticking to a system or culture that is very much filled with, I teach the child takes a test, and they move on. No more, no less.
I will say it again, that is not education.
It's not.
That's not producing globally viable.
It's producing global professionals that is meant to produce. And it's producing industrial workers, fast food workers, all of those things. For those, it's not meant to do. Industrial.
So y'all, you heard it here. I'm gonna let that alone. I want to thank you, my brother, for finishing out this series. Um, I'm gonna give you a little second to give your own little plugs. What you got going on? What you been doing? Where you going? What can we look for you? What you got?
Yes, yes. So, again, I just want to thank you for even allowing me into this space. Although I work in higher education, I do think that as a whole, the education system not only needs to work together, but we also need to figure out how can we make the leaders and the pioneers that are leaving our institutions go out, especially within the education system, to make and change our education system as a whole. And so currently, right now, I'm currently working on my um, I'm going into my third year. I just finished out my second year within my PhD program. I'm going into my third year, finishing out my last three classes. And so I'll be doing my dissertation on Black male elementary teachers and their experiences. And so I'm really looking forward to, just learning as much as I can and being able to provide a space where I'm sharing the stories of Black male elementary teachers. And, from there, being able to either A, to change policy, create my own nonprofit in regards to influencing and helping guys, younger students who may be interested, black boys, I would say, who are interested in being educators at the elementary realm and really introducing them to these career options. But overall, I am an advocate for education as a whole. If I can ever just speak to any students, schools, teachers, communities, parents, whether that's on the higher ed side or that's on the K through 12 side, please let me know. You can follow me on LinkedIn, or I do have social media. You can follow me on Facebook as well, Trevor D. McCray on both of those platforms. Please feel free to follow me. Right now, I will say that I'm a struggling doctoral student. No, I'm not asking for any money, but in this realm of the pandemic and just being a doctoral student, life is hard, life is rough. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. And although this is a glorious and a prestigious degree, that will add two letters in the front of my name. Well, I would say three in a sense, PhD. But it's hard, and it definitely takes a lot of work. It's definitely mentally, emotionally, and physically draining on a daily basis. But I'm here to push through, not only for myself, but for my community and those who look like me. Because again, it takes a village to raise a child, but also too, it takes a village to change the structure of this community, and also to change the structure of education. And so, any way that I can help or be a resource to any of you that's watching or will be watching, please let me know. Again, my name is Trevor McCray, and I am signing out. I'm doing it for my Black and brown folks that's in the background right here. And again, I'm for the people, by the people, raised by the people, and I'm going to forever be for the people.
Man, I believe that with Black Power, Amen, and all of those things, right? Bro, I appreciate you. So what we will do, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be back in June or the end of June, beginning of July. We're going to start a new series. It's going to be executive directors and advocacy. So I look forward to seeing you guys, and thank you for those that have followed. And I look forward to bringing some new people on stage. And my man Chaco is ready to go for his walk. So I'm gonna sign off. W, you have a great weekend.
All righty. Y'all have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.